Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I was somewhere between 9 and 11 years old when this happened. During the years my family lived in a small 3-bedroom duplex. It wasn't a fancy place. It was the kind of home that felt tight even when everyone was quiet, where sounds traveled easily and privacy didn't really exist. Still, it was home, and for a while it was all I knew. The layout of the house is important. My bedroom was at the end of a short, straight hallway. Directly across from my room was my mother's bedroom. The hallway was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass each other comfortably. At night, it always felt longer than it really was. My older brother's room was on the opposite side of the house, far enough away that you could hear him if he moved around, especially since the house wasn't well insulated. For the entire 3 to 4 years we lived there, I had one rule that I followed without ever really explaining it to anyone. I could not sleep facing the wall. Any time I tried, something would happen. At first, it wasn't immediate. I would roll onto my side, facing the wall, pull the blanket up, and close my eyes like any normal kid trying to fall asleep. Everything would feel fine for a few minutes. Then, just as I started drifting off, I would feel it. A sharp smack to the back of my head. It felt exactly like being hit with an open hand. Not hard enough to seriously hurt, but hard enough to jolt me awake instantly. Hard enough that there was no mistaking it for a dream or a muscle twitch. The first few times it happened, I was convinced it was my older brother messing with me. He had always liked to push buttons and scare me when he could. It made sense. That's what older brothers do. I would jump up, heart racing, and look toward my door, expecting to see him laughing or running away. But no one was ever there. I brushed it off at first, even though it didn't fully make sense. Then it kept happening. Oh, again and again. Always the same way. Always when I was facing the wall. Never when I slept on my back or facing the room. I started paying attention to details. My bedroom door was old and loud. The hinges squeaked badly, and the door made a very distinct sound when it opened or closed. There was no way someone could sneak in quietly. One night, after being smacked awake yet again, I realized my door had been completely shut the entire time. That was when doubt crept in. My brother wasn't exactly subtle. If he had opened the door, I would have heard it. If he had been in my room, I would have seen him. Still, I didn't want to accept any other explanation. I told myself maybe I was half asleep. Maybe I imagined it. Then my brother went to juvenile detention. He was gone for over 6 months. The house was quieter without him, calmer in some ways. I remember thinking, without really saying it out loud, that at least now the smacking would stop. It didn't. The very first week he was gone, I tried sleeping facing the wall again. Within minutes of drifting off, I was hit in the same exact way. Same spot, same force, same sudden wake-up. I sat straight up in bed, heart pounding, staring at my closed door, knowing there was absolutely no one else in the house who could have done it. My mother was not someone who moved quickly or quietly. Every step she took was heavy and obvious. If she walked down the hallway, you heard her coming. If she opened a door, you heard it. There was no chance she could have snuck into my room, hit me, and disappeared without a sound. It even happened once when I had a friend sleeping over. We were lying on separate sides of the bed, talking quietly before going to sleep. Eventually, we turned over to get comfortable. I faced the wall without thinking about it. Not long after, the familiar smack hit me in the back of the head. I jumped and yelped, fully awake. My friend sat up immediately and asked what happened. I told him someone hit me. He was confused. He hadn't seen or heard anything. He hadn't felt anything. Whatever was happening, it only ever happened to me. After that, I stopped trying to fight it. I trained myself to sleep facing the room or on my back. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than being woken up violently in the middle of the night. Then there was the night I saw him. My bedroom door was left open that night. I don't remember why. Maybe my mom forgot to close it. Maybe I didn't want it closed. Either way, the hallway light was off, leaving the corridor dark except for a faint light spilling in from somewhere else in the house. I fell asleep on my back. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly. There was no sound that woke me. No noise, no movement. Just an overwhelming feeling that I was not alone. The kind of feeling that snaps you awake before your brain has time to understand why. I lay there, frozen, staring upward. I had the strong sense that someone was standing above me. Slowly, I shifted my gaze down the hallway. Because I was lying on my back, the hallway appeared upside down from my point of view. What I saw made no sense at first. There was a soft blue light suspended in the middle of the hallway. It wasn't bright. It didn't hurt my eyes. It wasn't flashing or pulsing. It was gentle, almost calm, floating about 6 to 12 inches above the floor. It didn't light up the walls or ceiling the way a normal light would. It just existed there, contained within itself. I stared at it for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but it felt like at least a full minute. Maybe more. I wasn't scared. That's what stands out the most when I think back on it. I should have been terrified. I was a kid, alone at night, seeing something impossible in my hallway. But instead of fear, I felt strangely calm. After watching the light, I rolled over. Once I turned, I saw him. Standing there, or floating, was a slim, middle-aged man. He was covered in the same soft blue light I had been watching. His feet were not touching the floor. He hovered in the hallway between my room and my mother's room, exactly in the center, as if he belonged there. He was looking directly at me. His face was completely expressionless. Not angry, not kind, just neutral. His eyes met mine, and we held eye contact without speaking. I had never seen him before in my life. He didn't look like anyone I knew. He didn't look threatening. He didn't look familiar. And for some reason, I wasn't afraid. We stared at each other for what felt like a very long time. There was no movement, no sound, no pressure, just stillness. I remember being aware of my breathing, slow and steady, as if my body didn't recognize danger. About 10 uninterrupted minutes passed. No blinking panic, no racing thoughts, just watching each other in silence. Somehow, while still looking at him, I fell back asleep. When I woke up in the morning, he was gone. I never saw him again. There were no more blue lights, no figures in the hallway, no repeat visits. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But one thing never changed. Until the day I moved out of that house, I could not sleep facing the wall. Anytime I tried, even years later, the same thing would happen. A quick, sharp smack to the back of my head in the middle of the night, enough to wake me instantly, enough to remind me that whatever it was, it hadn't left. I told people. I tried to explain it. No one believed me. They told me it was dreams, or imagination, or sleep paralysis, or stress. They told me I was remembering it wrong. But I knew the difference between a dream and being hit. I knew the difference between fear and imagination. I lived there for years. I learned the rules of that house. And one of those rules was simple. Do not sleep facing the wall. Years ago, two friends and I went camping during the fall. The kind of trip that feels calm and grounding at first and slowly turns into something you never quite shake off. We were camping in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to swallow sound. The air was cool and damp, the kind that settles into your clothes and hair without you noticing right away. Fall had already taken hold. Leaves were starting to rot on the forest floor, and everything smelled earthy and wet. It was beautiful, but also heavy in a way that's hard to describe unless you've spent time in those woods. We weren't doing anything extreme or adventurous, just a simple camping trip, one night out in nature, away from the noise of daily life. We had a small tent, just big enough for the three of us. When we laid down to sleep, we staggered our positions to make it fit. Two of our heads were on one side of the tent, close together, and the third person's head was on the opposite side. Our bodies overlapped slightly, sleeping bags brushing against each other, the thin tent wall only inches from our faces. That night was unusually quiet. There was no wind, no rain, no animals making noise nearby. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. As the night went on, fog started to roll in, slow and thick, creeping through the trees and settling low to the ground. Even inside the tent, we could feel the moisture in the air. The kind of fog that muffles sound and makes everything feel distant and unreal. At some point, I woke up without knowing why. I wasn't startled awake. I just surfaced out of sleep, hovering in that half-awake state where your mind hasn't fully caught up yet. I lay there for a moment, listening. Everything felt still. My friend's breathing was steady. The tent was quiet. I was just starting to drift back to sleep when I heard it. At first, I thought I was dreaming. It sounded like a muffled voice, the way someone sounds when they're talking on a cell phone with bad reception. The sound wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to make out words. The voice kept saying, "Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?" Over and over again. The tone wasn't aggressive or threatening. It sounded confused, like someone genuinely trying to reach another person and failing. The strangest part was where it was coming from. The sound wasn't outside the tent. It wasn't distant. It was coming from inside the tent, from the center, right between all of our heads. It felt like the voice was coming from the exact middle point where our sleeping bags met, close enough that it felt invasive. Too close. Before I could fully process what was happening, one of my friends spoke up in a low, uncertain voice. They asked, "Are you hearing that?" The moment they said it, my stomach dropped. That question confirmed I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't dreaming. No, someone else was hearing it too. Immediately, all three of us sat up at the same time. Sleeping bags rustled, elbows bumped. The tent shifted slightly as we scrambled around, suddenly wide awake and alert. Our first instinct was practical. We assumed it had to be a phone. One of us must have accidentally left a phone in the tent. And maybe it was picking up a call or some weird signal. We started digging through everything. Sleeping bags, pockets, backpacks. We felt around the floor of the tent, I checking every inch. The voice continued for a few seconds longer, still saying the same thing. "Hello? Can you hear me?" Then it stopped. There was no phone. We froze, hands still, breathing heavy in the cramped space. The silence afterward felt louder than the voice itself. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then I turned toward my friend on the opposite side of the tent and asked them what they heard, wanting to make absolutely sure we were all experiencing the same thing. They answered without hesitation. They said it sounded like someone saying, "Hello? Can you hear me?" The exact same words, the exact same tone. They also said it sounded like it was coming from the other side of the tent, not from their own side. That detail stuck with me. All three of us agreed on the same things. The words, the sound, the location, and the fact that it wasn't coming from any one person's belongings. We didn't laugh it off. No one made jokes. The mood shifted completely. The fog outside pressed in on the tent, making everything feel smaller and more enclosed. We talked quietly, trying to piece together explanations. Maybe someone nearby was on the phone. Maybe sound traveled strangely in the fog, but none of it made sense. The campground was silent. We hadn't seen or heard anyone else nearby. And the voice didn't sound like it was echoing through the woods. It sounded like it was right there with us. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear. We lay back down, though none of us slept well after that. Every small sound made us tense. Every movement of the tent fabric felt amplified. I remember staring into the darkness, listening for the voice to come back, half expecting it to start again at any moment. It never did. Morning came slowly. The fog lingered, thick and heavy, clinging to the trees and the ground. Everything looked muted and gray, like the color had been drained from the world. We packed up quietly, all of us still thinking about the night before. Before leaving, we checked the car. All of our cell phones were sitting exactly where we had left them, untouched inside the vehicle. None of us had brought a phone into the tent, not one. To make things even stranger, there was no cell reception at the campground. No bars, no signal, nothing. Even if a phone had been nearby, it wouldn't have been able to make or receive a call. That realization sealed it for me. Whatever we heard wasn't a phone. It wasn't someone nearby. It wasn't interference or a bad signal. Three people heard the same thing, at the same time, from the same place, and there was no physical source for it. Years have passed since that night, but the memory still sends shivers up my spine. It wasn't loud or violent or dramatic. It was quiet, confused, almost human in a way that made it worse. The voice wasn't trying to scare us. It sounded like it was trying to connect, trying to be heard, and failing. Sometimes, that's what makes experiences like that linger. Not the fear, but the unanswered question. Who was speaking? Why did it sound like a phone call? And why did it happen right there, in the middle of us, on a night so still that even the forest seemed to be listening? I've been camping many times since then. I've slept in tents, cabins, and under the open sky. I've heard animals, wind, rain, and strange natural sounds. But I've never heard anything like that again. And I hope I never do, because once you hear something that shouldn't be possible, in a place where there's no explanation, it changes the way silence feels forever. I was very young when this happened. Young enough that sleep still came easily, and dreams blended into reality without warning. I remember that night clearly, even though so many years have passed. I was lying in my bed, wrapped in my blanket, with my right ear pressed deep into my pillow. The house was quiet in that way only nighttime can be quiet, when even small sounds feel louder because everything else has gone still. I must have already been asleep for some time, because I had no memory of drifting off. One moment there was nothing, and the next moment everything changed. I was jolted awake by a sudden roar, so loud and so close that it felt like it went straight into my right ear. It wasn't like a normal noise, not like a shout or something falling. It was deeper, heavier, almost like sound itself had weight. For a split second, I thought something had exploded right beside my head. My heart started racing before my mind could catch up, and I sat up fast, gasping for air as if I had been underwater. I was completely confused. My body was awake, but my thoughts were tangled and slow, still caught halfway in sleep. Panic crept in almost immediately, spreading through my chest and into my arms. I started scanning my room, my eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for anything that could explain what had just happened. Shadows stretched strangely in the dark, made longer by the faint light coming in through the window. Every familiar object suddenly looked unfamiliar, like my room had shifted slightly while I slept. My mind was close to full panic mode. I didn't know if the sound had come from inside the house or inside my head. I listened closely, holding my breath, waiting to hear it again. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. Just the soft hum of the house settling and my own breathing, fast and uneven. That was when I turned my head to the right. Standing beside my bed was a little boy. At first, my brain couldn't fully process what I was seeing. He looked real, solid, like any other child. He was about my size, maybe a little smaller. He stood close enough that I felt like I could reach out and touch him. He wasn't threatening or scary in the way monsters are supposed to be. He wasn't twisted or distorted. He was just a boy. What made him different was the light. He was glowing blue. It wasn't a harsh glow, not bright enough to hurt my eyes. It was soft, almost gentle, like moonlight filtered through water. The glow wrapped around him evenly, outlining his small body and making his face easy to see even in the dark. The blue light reflected faintly off my bed and the wall, giving the room an unreal, dreamlike feel. But strangely, that wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was his face. He looked sad. Not crying, not angry, just deeply sad in a quiet way that felt heavy. His eyes held a kind of loneliness that I didn't have words for back then, but somehow I understood it anyway. There was something about him that made my chest ache. Instead of fear, I felt sympathy. I remember feeling bad for him, the same way you feel bad when you see another kid sitting alone on a playground. We just looked at each other for a moment. Time felt slow, stretched thin. I don't remember screaming or trying to run. I don't remember calling for my parents. I was scared, yes. But the fear was muted by confusion and an odd sense of calm. It felt like he didn't mean any harm. It felt like he was there for a reason, even if I didn't understand what that reason was. After a minute, or maybe longer, I worked up the courage to move. Slowly, carefully, I leaned a little closer to him. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know what I was supposed to do or say, but something inside me told me not to pull away. Instead, I muttered a quiet "hey." My voice was barely louder than a whisper, shaky and unsure. The moment the word left my mouth, he disappeared. There was no flash, no dramatic movement. He didn't fade slowly or walk away. He was simply gone, like he had never been there at all. The space beside my bed was empty again, just air and shadows. The blue light vanished with him, and my room snapped back into darkness. I froze. I stared at the spot where he had been, my mind racing now. I fear finally catching up with me. I pulled my blanket tighter around myself and sat there, listening, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. The house remained silent. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back into sleep, though it wasn't peaceful. I woke up the next morning with the memory still fresh. replaying in my head, as if it had happened seconds ago. A few days later, I told my mother what I had seen. I didn't know how she would react. I was worried she would laugh or tell me it was just a dream. But she listened carefully, her expression serious as I explained everything in my own clumsy, childlike way. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, like she was thinking about something. Then she told me something that made my stomach twist. She explained that the people who owned the house before us had a son. He had died when he was 5 years old in a car accident. She didn't know many details, only that it had been tragic and devastating for the family. What made it stranger was that the accident hadn't happened near the house. It wasn't like he had died there or been hurt on the property. At the time, I didn't fully understand what that meant. I just knew that the boy I had seen was about the same age. The thought settled into my mind and stayed there, growing heavier as I got older. There was something else about the house that mattered too. When we moved in, the house had already been renovated. A second floor had been added, changing its original shape and layout. Walls had been moved, rooms restructured. What I thought of as my bedroom hadn't always existed in the same way. The house I lived in wasn't exactly the same house the boy had known. As I grew older, I started thinking about that night more deeply. Memories have a way of changing over time, but this one stayed clear. I remembered his sad expression more than anything else. Not fear, not shock, just sadness. It made me wonder why he had appeared to me specifically. My current theory is the only explanation that feels right to me. I think the boy finally found his way back home. Maybe wherever he had been, wherever he had gone after the accident, he eventually returned to the place he remembered as safe. The place that was supposed to be home. But when he arrived, everything was different. The house had changed. His old home was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. New rooms, new walls, new people. I think he was confused, lost in a place that was once his. And I think he came to me because I was the new boy of the house. I was the one who slept in the space that didn't exist when he was alive. I was the one who had taken his place without even knowing it. Maybe he wasn't trying to scare me. Maybe he just wanted to be seen. Maybe he wanted acknowledgement or understanding, or simply to know that someone was there. That would explain the sadness in his eyes. He didn't stay long. Maybe once he realized that his home was truly gone, that things could never be the way they were, he left. Or maybe he just needed that brief moment of connection. A quiet hello in the dark. Whatever the truth is, that night has stayed with me. Not as a nightmare, but as a strange, gentle memory. One that makes me wonder about the idea of home and how deeply it can be tied to who we are, even after everything else is taken away. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. I used to work at a museum that had once been a fully functioning prison. Long before it became a place for tours and history lessons, it had been a place of punishment, confinement, anger, and suffering. By the time I started working there, the cells were empty and the bars were cold to the touch. But the atmosphere never felt empty. From the very beginning, there was a sense that the past had not fully let go of that place. I worked there for over 8 years. And during that time, I experienced more things than I can easily explain. At first, I tried to be rational about it. I told myself that old buildings make strange noises, that the mind can play tricks on you when you're tired, especially when you're working late shifts in dim lighting. But the longer I stayed there, the harder it became to ignore what was happening. These weren't just sounds or feelings. These were physical encounters. I was pushed more times than I can count. Sometimes it felt like a firm shove to the shoulder. Other times like hands pressing against my back, forcing me forward when no one was there. I was slapped across the arm once while standing completely alone in a hallway. I had something bite me hard enough to leave a mark, a sharp pain that made me yell out in shock. I was dragged by my clothing, pulled backward as if someone had grabbed onto me and didn't want to let go. I was even punched once, a sudden blow that knocked the breath out of me and sent me stumbling. There was never anyone there when these things happened. Nighttime was always the worst. Locking up the buildings after hours was part of the job, and it was the part everyone dreaded the most. Each building had its own energy, its own personality, but some were far more active than others. As I walked through dark hallways, flashlight in hand, keys jingling too loudly in the silence, I never knew what I might see when I turned a corner. That uncertainty created a constant tension that sat heavy in my chest. Some nights, it was just the feeling of being watched. Other nights, it was footsteps behind me that stopped the moment I turned around. And then there were the nights when things made themselves known in ways that couldn't be brushed off. One night, I went into the cell house to turn off the lights. The cell house was one of the oldest parts of the prison. A long stretch of metal bars, concrete floors, and narrow walkways. Even during the day, it felt oppressive. At night, it felt alive. Every sound echoed, every movement felt amplified. I rounded a doorway, already uneasy, and came face to face with a full-bodied apparition. He was standing there in an inmate's uniform, solid and unmistakable. He wasn't transparent or misty. He looked real, like a living person who had simply stepped out of a cell. For a split second, my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I thought maybe someone had wandered into a restricted area, maybe a co-worker playing a cruel joke. Then he vanished. There was no fade, no warning. He was just gone. The space he had occupied suddenly empty. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it echoed off the walls. The lights buzzed overhead, and the cell house felt colder than it had moments before. I finished my task as quickly as I could and got out of there without looking back. That wasn't even the only entity I encountered regularly. There was one inmate in particular who had been notorious when the prison was still active. He had been involved in one of the major riots, a violent event that left lasting scars on the facility and on the people who survived it. Stories about him were still told by staff, passed down like warnings. According to the records, he had been aggressive, unpredictable, and deeply angry. His spirit, for lack of a better word, seemed to have attached itself to me. I would feel him following me as I walked the grounds. The sensation was unmistakable, like a presence just a step behind, always just out of sight. Sometimes I would hear footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped. Other times, I would feel a pressure in the air, heavy and hostile, as if someone was standing too close. It didn't matter where I went. He was there. One night, I was with a paranormal investigation group that had been granted special access. They were professionals, respectful of the space, and fully aware of the history of the prison. We went into an area that we never allow the public to visit because it's in serious disrepair. The floors are unstable, the walls cracked, and parts of the structure are barely holding together. Even during the day, it's dangerous. At night, it feels downright wrong. As soon as we entered, the atmosphere changed. The air felt thick, almost hard to breathe. The group set up their equipment, whispering to one another, trying not to disturb whatever might be there. I stayed close, already uneasy. That's when it happened. We were screamed at to leave. It wasn't a distant sound or a faint voice. It was loud, furious, and clear. The sound echoed through the space, bouncing off the walls. At the same time, something snarled directly at me, a deep animalistic sound filled with pure aggression. I felt it in my bones. Every instinct in my body told me that whatever was there did not want us there, especially me. We didn't argue. We left immediately. Encounters like that were not uncommon. Shadow figures were a regular occurrence, not just for me, but for my co-workers as well. We would see them moving along walls, darting through doorways, standing at the end of corridors. Sometimes they would just watch. Other times they would follow, I staying just close enough to be noticed, but never fully revealing themselves. Visitors experienced it too. There were days when people would come running out of certain buildings, faces pale, breathless, saying they felt chased. Maximum security was especially bad. More than once, visitors refused to continue tours after stepping inside. Some claimed they were followed. Others said something whispered to them, or that they felt hands brushing against them. A few left the grounds entirely, shaken and silent. By the time my 8 years there came to an end, I had dozens of stories, enough to fill hours of conversation, enough to convince even the biggest skeptics that something remains in places like that. Prisons hold pain, fear, rage, and despair, and not all of it fades when the doors close for good. That museum may look quiet now, preserved and educational, but beneath the surface, it still remembers what it was. And sometimes it reminds the people who walk its halls that the past is never as gone as we like to believe. If you want, you can send the next story whenever you're ready. Whenever I get sick, something strange happens to me. It doesn't matter if it's a mild cold or a full-blown flu. Every time my body weakens, my sleep changes, and with it comes the same nightmare. It has followed me for as long as I can remember, repeating itself with such consistency that it feels less like a dream and more like something waiting for me the moment I close my eyes. For context, my room has always been a little chaotic. I have a metal bed frame that creaks if I move too much, and I've never been the neatest person. Clothes end up on the floor, books pile up where they don't belong, and my closet is usually more of a storage space than an organized place. That mess has always felt normal to me, comforting even. But in my dreams, it becomes something else entirely. Whenever I'm sick, the same dream starts the same way. I find myself lying in bed, unable to move. I'm aware of my surroundings, aware of my own body, but completely frozen. My room looks exactly the way it does in real life, down to the smallest details. The lighting is dim, heavy, like the air itself has weight. Sitting on the metal frame at the foot of my bed is a woman. She looks like she's in her 30s, though it's hard to tell for sure. Her black hair is long and horribly tangled, clumped together as if it hasn't been brushed or washed in years. Her skin looks wrong. It's pale in some places, dark in others, and covered in patches that resemble fungus, like mold growing on damp walls. It looks sick, decaying, but still alive. Her eyes are the worst part. They glow silver, not bright like headlights, but dull and cold, reflecting just enough light to make sure I can't ignore them. She never smiles. She never frowns. She doesn't blink or breathe in any way I can notice. She just sits there, completely still, watching me. Hours seem to pass. I know it's a dream, but it doesn't feel like one. Time stretches endlessly. My body aches from not being able to move. My mind screams for me to wake up, to do something, anything, but I can't. She never touches me. She never speaks. She just watches, like she's waiting for something to happen. Toward the end of the dream, something always changes. Her face begins to shift, slowly, painfully, like wet clay being molded by invisible hands. The tangled hair becomes familiar. The shape of her face sharpens into something I recognize. And then I realize that she is becoming me. In the final moments, I'm no longer lying in the bed. I'm standing where she was, looking down at my own body, watching myself trapped and helpless. That's when I usually wake up. Except one time I didn't. There was one time when I was extremely sick, sicker than usual. All I could do was sleep. My body felt heavy, feverish, disconnected from itself. I drifted in and out of consciousness for hours, sometimes days, barely aware of what was real. That was the time when the dream changed. I went to sleep, expecting the woman again. Instead, I woke up unable to breathe. At least that's what it felt like. Something was sitting on my chest, crushing the air out of my lungs. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move my arms, my legs, even my fingers, but nothing responded. The only part of me I could control were my eyes. Panic flooded my mind as I realized I was completely pinned down. When I forced my eyes open, I saw it. A gargoyle was sitting on my chest. It was heavy, solid, crouched low like a predator. Its skin looked like rough stone, cracked and aged, and its face was twisted into a permanent snarl, its claws pressed into me, keeping me completely immobilized. I could feel its weight, feel the pressure, feel the fear pounding through my body. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes were forced toward my closet. The closet door was open, and the inside looked exactly the way it had when I went to sleep. Every detail was right. The clothes were piled where I left them. Socks were scattered across the floor in the same careless way. Nothing was rearranged, nothing distorted. It looked like real life, not a dream version of it. That's what made it worse. Standing inside the closet was something far taller than any human should be. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its body was broad and unnatural, covered in dark, rough skin. Its eyes glowed yellow, sharp and intelligent in a way that made my stomach twist. Long claws extended from its hands, curved and thick, capable of tearing through flesh with ease. Massive red wings folded behind its back. The membranes stretched tight between spikes that jutted out like weapons. Its head was the most terrifying part. It looked like a dragon's head, elongated and angular, with a mouth full of teeth that looked far too real. When it moved, the sound of its joints shifting felt loud in the silence of the room. It stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Each step brought it closer to my bed. The gargoyle on my chest didn't move, didn't need to. It was only there to keep me helpless, to make sure I couldn't look away, couldn't escape. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to scream for my parents. But my body betrayed me completely. The demon stepped closer and closer until it was standing right beside my bed. I could see every detail of its face, every ridge and shadow. Its yellow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt like it was looking through me, not at me. And then I woke up screaming. I bolted upright in my bed, gasping for air, my chest aching as if something had really been sitting on it. My throat burned from the scream I hadn't been able to release in the dream. The room was empty. The closet was just a closet again. No gargoyle, no demon, just me, shaking and soaked in sweat. I didn't tell anyone right away. Days passed before I finally told my dad about it. I tried to explain it as calmly as I could, though my voice still shook when I described the details. I told him about the paralysis, the gargoyle, the demon in the closet. I expected him to tell me it was just a nightmare, maybe stress or fever-induced hallucinations. Instead, his face went pale. After a long pause, he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said he had the same dream years ago, not something similar, not something vaguely close, the same dream. He described the demon before I could finish, using the same words I had, the same height, the same yellow eyes, the same red wings with spikes, the same dragon-like head. The only difference was what happened to him. In his dream, the demon didn't stop at the bed. It tried to drag him underground, pulling him down into the floor as if the earth itself had opened beneath him. When my mom overheard the conversation, she confirmed it. She said that years ago he had described that exact demon to her after waking up terrified. She remembered the details because they had disturbed her so deeply. That confirmation made everything feel real in a way I wasn't prepared for. To this day, I don't know what to think of it. I don't know if it's something connected to illness, something genetic, something psychological, or something far stranger. All I know is that whenever I get sick, I dread going to sleep. Because I know that somewhere between waking and dreaming, something is waiting, watching, and sometimes it feels like it knows exactly who I am. My mother had a sister who passed away very young, long before I was old enough to remember anything clearly. On my mother's side of the family, her name still came up from time to time, usually during quiet conversations or family gatherings. People would sometimes say things like, "She visits you in your dreams," or mention that she appears to family members when something important is about to happen. I never paid much attention to those stories. I grew up not believing in anything supernatural. I'm an engineer by profession, and even as a young adult, I was always practical, logical, and grounded in things that could be measured, tested, and explained. Ghosts, spirits, signs from beyond, none of that fit into how I understood the world. I didn't argue with my relatives about their beliefs, but I didn't take them seriously either. To me, they were just stories people told themselves to feel better about loss. That mindset stayed with me well into adulthood. Then, one night, I had a dream that changed the way I look at things forever. It didn't start like a normal dream. There was no confusion, no strange transitions, no feeling of things being unreal. From the very beginning, everything felt solid and clear. What made it even stranger was that I was fully aware that I was dreaming. This had never happened to me before. I've never been able to lucid dream, never had control inside a dream, and never been conscious of the fact that I was asleep. But that night, I knew. I was aware that I was inside a dream, yet it felt more real than many moments I've experienced while awake. The colors were natural. The sounds were accurate. The environment felt exactly the way it would in real life. In the dream, I was sitting in the kitchen of my house. Everything looked exactly the way it should. The table, the chairs, the layout of the room. It was all correct, down to small details I wouldn't normally focus on. There was no distortion, no dreamlike exaggeration. It felt like I had simply woken up and walked into the kitchen. While I was sitting there, I heard loud banging on the front door. It wasn't a gentle knock. It was urgent, forceful, the kind of sound that immediately makes your stomach tighten. I remember feeling surprised, but not scared. It felt natural to get up and answer the door, as if this was something that was supposed to happen. I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing there was a woman. She was small in build, shorter than me, with a thin frame. Her hair immediately stood out. It was styled in an old-fashioned way, not something you would see often in modern times. It looked neat and deliberate, as if it belonged to a different generation. I couldn't see her face clearly. It wasn't hidden by shadow. It wasn't covered. It was blurred, like someone had intentionally smoothed it out, making her features impossible to recognize. Despite that, I wasn't afraid. She spoke to me in my native language. Her voice was calm but serious. There was urgency in the way she spoke. Not panic, but certainty. She looked directly at me and said, "You and your brother go back to XXX City right now." She repeated it. "You and your brother go back to XXX City right now." There was no explanation, no small talk, no emotion in her voice other than insistence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten or plead. She simply stated it as a fact, something that needed to happen immediately. She said it several times. I remember standing there, listening, fully aware that I was dreaming, but unable to change anything about the situation. I didn't ask her who she was. I didn't ask why we needed to go. I just listened. After she finished speaking, the dream ended. I woke up. I didn't jump out of bed or panic. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the dream in my mind. It felt different from any dream I had ever had. It didn't fade quickly the way dreams usually do. The details stayed sharp. The woman's voice stayed clear in my memory. Still, I brushed it off. Even though it felt strange, I told myself it was just a dream. The brain does weird things during sleep. Stress, random memories, imagination. There were plenty of logical explanations. I went on with my morning routine, got ready, and started my day. Then my phone rang. It was my uncle. Most of my relatives on my mother's side live in XXX City, so hearing from him wasn't unusual. What was unusual was his tone. He sounded shaken, exhausted. He told me that my cousin had been in a serious accident the night before. It had happened late at night, around the same time I would have been asleep. My cousin was in the ICU. The news hit me hard. My mind immediately went back to the dream. The timing was too perfect to ignore. I didn't say anything about it right away. I listened, asked questions, and tried to process what I was hearing. Thankfully, my uncle told me that my cousin was stable and receiving good care. Later, after some time had passed and my cousin's condition had improved, I traveled to XXX City to visit him. During that visit, I finally told my uncle about the dream. I explained everything, how real it felt, the woman at the door, the exact words she said, the urgency. I expected skepticism. I expected him to laugh it off or suggest I was imagining connections that weren't there. Instead, he went quiet. Then he told me something that made my skin crawl. He said the woman I described sounded exactly like my great-aunt, my mother's sister, the one who had passed away young, the one people always said visited family members in dreams. I felt a chill run through me, but I still wasn't convinced. My memory is unreliable, especially when it comes to dreams. I had never seen her before, at least not in any way I could remember. I told him that I couldn't see the woman's face clearly in the dream anyway. That's when he pulled out old photographs. As soon as I saw them, my jaw dropped. The woman in the photos looked exactly like the woman from my dream. The same small frame, the same posture, the same hairstyle, done in that old-fashioned way that had stood out to me so clearly. Even without seeing her face in the dream, I recognized her instantly. It was undeniable. I asked my mother about it later. She told me the only time I had ever met my great-aunt was when I was an infant, not even a year old. I would have had no memory of her, no conscious recollection, no reason to imagine her appearance so accurately decades later. That was the moment my certainty began to crack. As an engineer, I still struggle with what it means. I don't suddenly believe in ghosts or spirits roaming the earth. I don't claim to understand what happened or how it happened. But I can't deny the facts as I experienced them. The awareness inside the dream, the message, the timing, the recognition. There are things we don't fully understand yet. Things that don't fit neatly into logic or equations. That experience taught me that dismissing something just because it doesn't fit your worldview doesn't make it unreal. I don't talk about it often. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway. But every time someone on my mother's side mentions her, every time someone talks about being visited in a dream, I listen differently now. Because one night, someone knocked on my door in a dream, told me to go back to XXX City. And by the next morning, I learned why. And no matter how rational I try to be, I know that dream was not just a dream. I was 5 years old when all of this started. We had just moved to Florida from New Jersey, and at that age, I didn't really understand what a big change it was supposed to be. To me, it was just a new place with different trees, warmer air, and an apartment that didn't feel like the old one. It sat toward the back of a large apartment complex on the third floor, far enough from the main road that everything felt a little too quiet at night. It was just my mother and me living there. No pets, no roommates, no nearby family, just the two of us trying to settle into a new life. At the time, I didn't know anything strange was happening. I was a kid. I played with my toys, watched cartoons, went to bed when my mom told me to, and assumed the world was exactly how it was supposed to be. It was only years later, when my mother finally told me what she experienced during that period, that I realized how unsettling those months really were. She told me that almost every single night, after things got quiet and the apartment complex settled down, she would hear noises, knocking sounds, heavy banging, and movement that didn't make sense. Sometimes it sounded like someone was hitting the walls. Other times it felt like the noise was coming from inside the apartment itself, shifting from one room to another. She said she tried to convince herself it was just neighbors, pipes, or the building settling. But deep down, it didn't feel right. The sounds didn't follow a pattern. They didn't come from the same direction every time. And no matter how often she checked, there was never anyone there. She didn't tell me any of this back then. She didn't want to scare me. Instead, she kept it to herself, lying awake at night, listening, tense and alert, waiting for something to happen. During the day, she acted normal, cooked meals, cleaned, and tried to give me a sense of stability. But at night, she said the apartment felt different, heavy, like something was watching or waiting. The moment that convinced her something was truly wrong happened while she was making dinner one evening. I remember this part clearly, even though I was so young. I was in my bedroom, playing on the floor with my toys. My room had a vaulted ceiling, which made it feel bigger than it actually was. Along one wall were shelves mounted high up, near the ceiling, where my stuffed animals were kept. There was no way I could reach them on my own. Even standing on a chair wouldn't have been enough. The bedroom door was wide open. I could hear my mother in the kitchen, moving around, cooking, humming softly to herself. Everything felt normal, calm. Then, without any warning at all, the door slammed shut, Not gently, not like a draft had pushed it. It slammed hard, violently, with a force that made the sound echo through the apartment. I remember freezing, my heart racing, not understanding what had just happened. My mother heard it too. She came running down the hallway, panicked, thinking I had hurt myself or something had fallen on me. When she opened the door, she stopped cold. I was lying on my bed, completely still, and every single stuffed animal that had been neatly placed on those high shelves was now in a pile, on the floor, right in the center of the room, not scattered around, not tossed randomly, piled together as if someone had carefully placed them there. I hadn't touched them. I couldn't have reached them. And even if I somehow had, there was no explanation for how they ended up arranged that way. My mother didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't ask me what I did. She already knew. She picked me up, held me close, and didn't say much at all. That night, she barely slept. Within days, she planned a one-week vacation just to get us out of that apartment. She said she needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do next. She never told me the real reason back then, but now I understand. That wasn't the only incident, not even close. Another night, much later, something happened that still gives me chills when I think about it. My mother woke up in the middle of the night feeling thirsty and went to the kitchen to get some water. The apartment was dark and quiet, the kind of silence that feels thick, like it presses against your ears. As she walked down the hallway, she saw me. I was sleepwalking. That alone wouldn't have terrified her. I had never sleepwalked before. But kids do strange things sometimes. What scared her was the way I was moving. She said I wasn't just wandering aimlessly. I was moving quickly, turning sharply, as if I was chasing something she couldn't see. My eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. No recognition, no awareness. She called out my name. I stopped and turned toward her. When I answered, it wasn't my voice. She told me the sound that came out of my mouth was deep, low, and unmistakably male. Not like a child trying to sound scary. Not like imagination or mishearing. It was a grown man's voice coming from a 5-year-old's body. She didn't wait to see what would happen next. She didn't try to wake me up. Fear took over completely. She ran out of the apartment, barefoot, heart pounding, and didn't come back until the sun came up. She said she sat in her car the entire night, locked the doors, and prayed until morning. When she returned, I was in my bed, asleep, like nothing had happened. I don't remember any of that. Not the sleepwalking, not the voice, not chasing anything. All of it lives only in my mother's memory, burned into her mind so deeply that even now, years later, her voice changes when she talks about it. She told me there were many more incidents, too many to count, objects moving, sounds with no source, feelings of being watched, a sense that whatever was in that apartment was focused on me, watching me, interacting with me. She said that was the part that terrified her the most. Eventually, we moved out. Life went on. I grew up. School, friends, work, normal experiences filled the years that followed. But every now and then, something would happen that reminded me of that time. A strange noise, a sudden chill, a dream that felt too real. And even now, as an adult, I still get that feeling sometimes. The same one my mother described. Like something unseen is just out of sight, lingering. When she finally told me everything, long after I was grown, I understood why she waited. Hearing it as a child would have broken something in me. Hearing it as an adult still shakes me to my core. I still get chills thinking about it, not just because of the door or the stuffed animals or the voice that wasn't mine, but because there were so many moments like that, so many things that happened that we never fully understood. And the scariest part isn't what we experienced. It's the fact that whatever it was knew exactly where we lived and exactly who I was. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.